Eat. Welcome. Now. Welcome. Now. 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 Eat. Eat. No. 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 8. Welcome.
Yay, thank you. That was Christina Isabel, who was up there on the box. And she was the choreographer and also the dancer. And my other partner in crime is the mic on now, is Liviu Pesar, who, when the Dolls was originally a 5-dancer piece, and very elaborate, and we just simplified it for this environment. So Liviu did the interactive projection design and was the technical director of the large piece that was there before. But anyway, so that's them, and they'll be here through this. And so I'll talk a bit, but we'll all be available for answering questions and talking about things. But I want to first thank Amy. Thank you, Amy, because this was really cool for doing this in this context, which is, I guess, I didn't really understand what it was, and Amy told me that this is expanded cinema. So the idea that doing it with a single dancer with the focus on the screen was a totally other thing and not a way I've ever worked before. And it was really wonderful and exciting. And the three of us have been talking about how we want to keep doing that and work with that model and make it longer and all that. So thank you for the opportunity, because it's like a whole other thing. So thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Hello again. This is Conversations at the Edge. This performance is part of Conversations at the Edge. This is a screening series, performance series, visiting artist series that we do here at the Gene Siskel Film Center. It's a collaboration between the Department of Film, Video, New Media, and Animation, the Gene Siskel Film Center, and the Video Data Bank. And this is, in fact, our last program of the season, so we're going out with a bang. And so to back up even further, to kind of introduce Claudia to those of you who don't know who she is or don't have a good sense of who she is, which I'm hopeful that most of the people here know. But Claudia is a renowned digital artist. She uses commercial CGI and 3D simulations technology to create sensual and subversive works on identity, representation, and experience. I think we saw some of that this evening. Her output includes multi-channel animated installations. She's going to show us some of these this evening in this larger talk. Augmented reality apps, and more recently, performances like these. And that these combine, dance, live actors, as well as projection mapping and sophisticated imaging technology. This kind of virtual meets the material world. And lucky for us, she's also a professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago here in our department, and she's sharing these ideas and processes and interventions with a new generation of artists. So she's really passing these ideas on, and they've continued to grow beyond this particular evening. So her work has been widely exhibited and collected by galleries and museums, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Met, the New Museum, and I-Beam, as well as Bitforms. And she's performed recently at the Arts Club of Chicago. Her work has been performed at I-Beam. And this piece, a version of this piece, or the first version of this piece, was performed or debuted at the Fashion Walk at Millennium Park. Yeah. So I think I don't want to say really anything more, because I think we really do want to hear from the woman herself. So please, let's give Claudia another round of applause. Claudia Hart.
The Dolls was actually developed in a classroom. I want to explain a little bit about it, because it was unusual the way we did it. It was workshopped as part of a class and we developed the project for the Fashion Walk. So this way of working, and I think that there are 3 of the people who were involved in this in the audience. Yeah. So there's Anthony Renda, and I think Eugen Lee is here. And is she? Eugen, are you here? No. Yes? No. And is Meredith here? No, neither of them are here. So we have 1 here. But there was a class of about 8 people. Most of them graduated by now. And where we produced the work as part of a class and walked them through the thought process our thought process in making it, and that included Liviu and Christina. So it was about a kind how the mind models or how we create, how we think through creativity and working and constructing a piece, which for me is very unusual, I think, for someone who works with high end technologies because I work in a very improvisatory way. So, although this stuff is very perfectionistic in its visual form, I sort of make it up as it goes along. So, I wanted to, as I go along, right? I don't have a big, I don't work from a storyboard, I don't work with a script or anything like that. So, I wanted to walk you through, therefore, my history a little bit, right? Because I found my way here. This is like very, can I do this? All right. I found myself where I am today because I didn't go to art school. I'm starting at the beginning. I didn't go to art school, and there was no technology when I started this journey. So I want to talk a little bit about my process of reaching the dolls, because that process is also the meaning of my work. So I want to start. See, I made a little Tumblr site to walk you through some references, and then what I'm going to do is show about 2 or 3 movies, so you can see the kind of stuff I normally do. Although there is no normal anymore, because at a certain point I left making these 3D animated movies and expanded them, so it's expanded cinema, but into a kind of expanded virtual practice. But I want to say that I am from New York City, and I grew up in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Like many city kids, you can't go out to play. So my mom used to leave me in the Metropolitan Museum. And so, because it was safe, and I would go around in there, and a lot of my formation as an artist had to do with that kind of life I led, in that I grew up in the Met and the MoMA, but it was more the Met for me. So I'm going to put my reading glasses on because I cannot see the screen anymore. And so basically, I'm going to walk you through things that are meaningful to me. I'm going to zoom through them because we'd only have a certain amount of time, because I want to have enough time that you can ask me questions. So I chose these very specific images also because they are, a lot of them, they appear in the movies I'm going to show you in a certain way. So that, I chose these. This is Jacques Louis, it's classicism and romanticism. So this is Jacques Louis David's Madame Recamier on her couch and Liberty on the Barricades. So this is romanticism and classicism. So I grew up in the Met, but I also studied art history at NYU. So I'm starting, the beginning of my creation as an artist was that I studied film theory in the Annette Michelson Cinema Studies program, and art history with Robert Rosenblum was one of the big influential ones on me, and various other significant art historians when I was a kid, because I had grown up in the Met, and that's what I loved. So I chose these, and I was always interested in the 18th century because it had something to do with modeling the tradition of philosophy and the philosophes. And this basic way, the interest in how the mind thinks, how we construct values and reality. So that's why making the piece with students and having to walk the dolls, walk them through how I construct and think about making a system, even though it's a personal system and an irrational system, started by studying art history and these kind of paradigms. So this was about the construction of opposites, classicism and romanticism, and a kind of dialectical relationship, how things cycle and spiral in terms of how humans construct a sense of reality. And I think that was very much about a part of the dolls. And this, see, I have to look at all the titles, because this is Thomas Cole's The Course of Empire. which was also early 19th century suite of painting sets in the New York Historical Society. They're huge paintings, and they were very important to me also, in which he charts the death, the decay of empires. So it starts with the savage, then there's the classical, the height of development, there's death, destruction, decay, and then barrenness. So actually, the Dolls was based on this suite of paintings, but it was also a significant group of paintings to me when I grew up. And the reason why I was also interested in them is that it's about creating a structure for time, how history moves in a kind of rationalistic way. First this happens, and then that happens, and then that and that. So it's algorithmic. And this always struck me as somehow very arbitrary and very soothing, but very constructed. So dealing with the kind of mathematical construction of things and constructions of time and the real and ideas of dialectical relationships sort of informed the way I do art. And this is Michael Snow's Wavelength, which I had to write my honors thesis on when I was a teenager. And this is a famous structuralist movie, and it was actually a 45-minute movie. I'm going to show a little bit of it now, in which a murder takes place in this room, and then the camera zooms in very slowly. So basically nothing happens. There's a sound. Oop. And although it's zooming into this picture of the beach in the back, and it's focusing on the actual structure of the camera work, and it's about time, sort of telescoping into the past, and time as a subject matter. Nothing really happens. We know there's a murder going on in the room, but we can't see it. So it's about experiencing the process of time itself. So I think that's enough. But these, I think, were sort of extremely formative influence. And I think of myself, as making structuralist films, because this kind of software that I use, this high-end software, is extremely structured. And we're going to get back to that idea of structure again. So I didn't go to art school, as I said, but when I became a magazine editor. I became a critic, and I was an editor of a magazine called ID. And then after that, I was editor of another one called Art Forum. I wasn't the senior editor. I was the reviews editor. And in doing that, at ID, I met Erica Beckman, who's an experimental filmmaker, who works with models. And she introduced me to Dan Graham, who's a well-known conceptual artist. And they told me, you're not a writer, you're really an artist. And they cultivated me and taught me art and mentored me, and that's how I started making art. I was in my mid-20s, I think. So going back again, I'm zooming. I put these a little bit out of order here. So that community was also a tremendously big influence on me, which is why I'm showing Jeff Wall. He was Dan's very good friend, and that was the Vancouver school. And so my interest, Jeff had a PhD in painting, he still does, PhD in art history. And his interest was in 18th century art. And when I saw these early works of his, and this is I think this is the first 79 photo of his that really struck. And in his mind, it was a revision of the Manet. So this idea that you could speak in a truly contemporary way and yet still integrate the tradition of classical painting was an epiphany for me. And then I was also interested in this kind of self-reflection, the looking in the mirror, the idea of art itself as a kind of telescoping in on the self and constructing a sense of reality. And so these are more Jeff Walls. Again, this idea of time, frozen time, time that's expanded and contracted, that was all really important to me. And then going back here again, that studies that I did about machines for viewing, how humans construct ideas of the real and machines for viewing them. So these were the Duras. Also, when I was, and the perspective machine, so the guy's looking through at the woman. And here's the Dura Melancholia, where she's thinking about introspecting and about thinking about how the world is constructed. And I think Amy told me to mention, and I think I have to, all of these pictures of mind models, they're all painted of men painting women. And so the same thing of this. So I think a lot of my mission is about constructing these paradigms about how we construct time, reality, a reason, and yet it's me contemplating myself. So I turn myself from subject to object to subject. So this interest of mine in this early period, when I discovered Maya, which was, I was living in Berlin and I saw Toy Story 01 at the Berlin Film Festival in 1990 something. It was early. Was an epiphany for me, and I was like, what's that? Because it seemed to be like this, a kind of mathematical model. And Maya was on the Unix platform. It wasn't easily available. I went back to New York, took a class so that I could use it, because there was no other way to do it other than at a school. And the way Maya itself is about the meditation on the interface, which you can see in the Dura. The idea that the philosophy of the interface, how we frame the real, how we construct vision, how we sequence time. To me, Maya captured my romantic imagination. And so Maya, this is actually notes from a talk. I gave a talk to teachers at the Art Institute, and that's a talk I give all the time about Maya as an epistemological knowledge of model of knowledge. So Maya is broken down into these four interfaces. They are based on, each is based on a different scientific paradigm, and it is it's the idea of simulations itself, that we can construct an interface for reality, for scientific knowledge, for all the fields of knowledge that we have, that explain the way the world works. So this is, I think, what I'm doing all the time. I'm taking these influences and I'm rechanneling them through into my object. So I want to show two other important things that I saw when I was in my late 20s. And this is the Bill Viola, which was another epiphany. This was something that he did when the super high-speed films came out. I think they were, cameras came out, so this was like a 240 frame a second movie that was slowed down to 24 frames. And again, the reference to Dutch classical painting, the idea that you can expand and contract time and reveal another kind of reality, that the manipulation of the media reveals the order of mind or another order of the real that's more real because it's reflecting that which you can't see in the real world but which the mind constructs. I think these are issues that I'm very interested in and have occupied me since I was a teenager. So that's that. And then, after doing Maya, this is the next thing that happened. So I started doing Maya, and I am working with 3D animation in the late 80s. And what did I know? I was a kid who grew up in the Met. my mom didn't let me watch TV. So, wait, I would like to stop this. So when I started taking these classes, I think I was one of the only contemporary artists who knew how to do this stuff. So I immediately started teaching it, and there were no schools like SAIC, meaning like art schools or arty serious schools where people know what expanded cinema is. So I taught in production-oriented schools that were for kids going into the game business. And I didn't really know anything about this stuff. So the other big motivating force for me was this, for example, Blood Rain was introduced on the cover of Playboy in, I think, the late 90s or the early, no, it wasn't the late 90s. Yeah, it was. And this idea that that was the language that I was using, and I was entering into this world, and I entered the culture of kids who were interested in games or Pixar movies even, none of which I knew nothing about this world. I had never been involved in it. I was a kid whose mother dropped them off at the Met, right? So I was not allowed. I watched 1/2 hour of TV my entire life until I became an adult. Now I'm obsessed with TV because my mom didn't let me watch it. So anyway, that's my art, I think. It's a collision between these two worlds. And so I think a lot of the when I show my earlier work, it has to do with always the female body, super sensualized versions of the female body, ideas of very decorative environments, beauty. A lot of this was my reaction or resistance to the way women are constructed in these kind of Blood Rain world. I mean, I found myself teaching kids who this is what they wanted to do. And I would never tell them what I really did because I was afraid, basically, that they would, I thought it was dangerous to do that. But I would do these demos in class of what I'll show you, sensual naked women who were moving very slowly, and they would be shocked. They would be making this stuff for their class projects, and I would demo what I'm going to show you, and it was interesting. So I don't know who was more scared, them or me. They became very scared also. So this weird hybridization between the confrontation of me with mass market game culture and first-person shooter world, and the kid who grew up in the Met and liked 18th century painting and thought Jeff Wall was cool, right? Is, I think, how we got to the dolls somehow. It's this weird mix. And so now I just want to show a few movies. So going back to the dolls, by the way, the dolls was based on Las Meninas. So it's a famous Velázquez painting. Also, ideas about the interface. The artist is behind the framing of the painting within the painting within the painting. It's very constructed. And that dress that she's wearing, the princess, is this dress, which I modeled as a 3D model in Maya, and drew. Actually, Anthony projected and hand drew over there. And that is printed again onto the dress. So again, this was my history. Somehow it looks really pop and contemporary, but at the same time, there's all this classicism and self-reflection and thinking, how do I deconstruct the real, and all this weird collision of opposites, really, like the romanticism and classicism that I showed you in the beginning. So let's just see a few movies now. And I want to start by showing something that I have very rarely shown, actually. And let's see. A lot of what's important to me. Wait, I'm going to show this one first. Okay. So part of what really has, I think I'm one of the first artists who's worked with 3D animation from an art point of view and from this very serious point of view. And so part of what, And I started teaching, and then I came here and started teaching students who are also, like you, art students with a lot of seriousness about it. So part of my project is also trying to understand what is this thing that I'm doing. This epistemological model of science and the real, which is this extremely complicated interface that's almost like an encyclopedia in the 18th century sense, an encyclopedia of all human knowledge, and in which you simulate the real and you look through a virtual camera and you make stuff. So you think it's real when you're making it. You have a weird, that's why we all get very extreme tendinitis, because we sit there for 16 hours barely moving, but yet we feel our bodies are in this space. So part of my project is trying to understand what is this thing, simulations. And one of the questions was, what is this medium? Is it a picture? Is it a painting? Is it a sculpture? Is it an environment? And I've come to believe that it's a hybrid, a sort of new media that's a hybrid between a virtual artificial camera and a sculpture. So it's, I think, a new form of sculpture. Some people, but maybe it's a new form of painting. But I think it's a medium itself. The rendered stuff is a new form of sculpture. So this trying to construct a thing which is maybe a sculpture or maybe it's a painting, I'm not sure. So this is Madame Recamier. I took her couch. I modeled her couch, and then I took a character, a woman that I constructed in Poser, which is a very cheap commercial character design software that allows you to use dial-up controls to give racial and age qualities to a character, which I also think is strange. So I made one that's old, and she's half black and half Asian. And then I took her body, I laid her on the Madame Recamier couch, and I sort of broke it to fit. And I broke her all over. And then in the Michael Snow deconstruction of cinema way of working, I put her in 5 odalisque postures, and I went from pose to pose, 500 frames breathing, 500 frames one camera shot, and 500 frames to the next camera shot. And so a lot of these are experiments, and I don't know what's going to happen when I do them. And in this case, it was called Caress because the camera seemed to be caressing the character. And I was interested in, this is actually a life-size piece done with 3 monitors. And it's a tomb sculpture, I thought of it as. And at this point, when I was doing this work, I decided what I'm doing is a hybrid between sculpture and painting. And so I think of it that way when I'm making it, because you have this simulated physical feeling that you're actually plastically making something. So that's Caress. And that's installed and loops and is a work that collectors can buy as a piece of sculpture in a custom case. So I think of it as a new form of sculpture. But then I think maybe I'm not doing a sculpture. Maybe it's a painting. So after I did a number of works that were sort of sculptural like that, I did a work that I decided was a painting. And that's a 7-minute movie, and I'm going to show it. So part of this was, how could you make a painting in a medium that's part sculpture and part movie? So actually, in that, I said to myself, what's a painting? A painting is this fluid stuff, paint and marks. And then, like I do everything, I set parameters for the structure of the movie. In this case, I put the body in there, she was the marks, and then I created a structure in which actually nothing's really moving. I just take the virtual camera and widen and widen and widen it until it goes into, so it's actually bending. So what you're experiencing is the bending of the eye or space to this, and you get this optical feeling that she's moving off to the right, but she's actually going straight up. So this idea of how we construct not perspective, but perception, and how we can distort this through optical means or through mind, constructions of mind. And I think that a lot of that was in the dolls also. And I want to say now, I'm going to show one other piece, and that was actually what the doll. Oh, no, I'm not. I was supposed to show another one. All right, so now, Trisha Brown. So when I got to the Art Institute, I met Mark Jeffries, and he said to me, you know, what you're doing is actually, he's in the performance department, and you all know him. He knows everybody. And he said to me, you know, what you're actually doing, because I was always trying to understand what am I doing? What is this thing? And he said, actually, what you're doing is avatar performance. So that's how I started doing the live. And he said, what you're doing is avatar dance. So I decided, I made a class. I designed a whole bunch of classes at the school under the aegis of experimental 3D. And a lot of these I had no idea, this is a new medium. So I would construct a class, the class had an idea, and I would say to the kids, now you make it up. So this one was called Digital Bodies. And it was the idea of avatar dance. So what if we were doing avatar dance? What would avatar performance be? And so what we did was screen a lot of movies together. Me and the class, dance movies, early 80s and 70s performance works. And then instead of saying we're going to do character animation, we were going to do avatar performance and be inspired by performance movies, a media performance. So this was one that I screened in the first Digital Bodies. And it had tremendous impact on me, and the dolls sort of emerged from this. And I did a piece inspired by it. So, but this is Trisha Brown's accumulations. This is the second version of the piece, actually. And this was a piece that was meant for camera. She first did it in 1970. So it's also very mathematical and very systems-y. And and it's also very cerebral, and it's based on the idea of gravity. She's actually lying on the floor, and she makes these patterns of motion, and you're looking at her in this direction, so you're seeing actually gravity pressing on her, and it's sort of anti-ballet. It's pure pressure of gravity. And the idea of the mathematical systems of it, and her as this unexpressive, to me, avatar, was so evocative of the world inside the computer that I thought, I want to do that somehow. So what I did was, and I also love this sort of early 70s TV look. And I thought, that it really is systems dance. She was the systems choreographer, and I was the systems movie maker, simulated mind model movie maker. So how was I going to bring these two things together? So what I did is, at that point, I got a grant. I think this was in 2010. I got a grant from the Ellen Stone Belloc Center for the Study of Women in Media, and that allowed me, it's a much longer name, but I don't really remember it, and they gave me both money and a chance to use the Columbia, the school down the street, a motion capture studio. So I invited Roberto Cifuentes, who's also, I think he's the chair now, of the performance department. And I strung him from wires. I hung him from wires in this motion capture studio. And we rehearsed before Trisha Brown's piece, but I hung him from wires and made it impossible for him to. He was the opposite of her. That's why I chose it. He was a Latin American male from a performance group called La Pocha Nostra that was very expressive and wild. And I hung him from wires so it would be impossible for him to be rational and systematic. And I asked him to perform that piece. And he made a lot of very spastic, uncomfortable motions. And then I took my avatar, the same one I was used in Caress, and put his motions in it, and then broke it up into the same mathematical patterns that Trisha Brown used in that piece, and it became this. And this is actually an installation for 6 offset, same soundtrack, but meant to be offset 6 times. And Edmund Campion, who did the other piece, also the sound for the black and white painting piece, did the sound composition for this. And I'm going to talk about the composition for the dolls because later. So we only see 4 of the 6 screens in this. This was an installation in a museum in China. So I think what I do, it's like the romantic and classic paintings that I showed. I take 2 things that are opposite, like hanging Roberto, a Latin American expressive, a wild performance artist from wires, making him do the opposite, which is this very rationalistic systems thing, putting it inside a body so you have like the romantic and the classic, these two impossible things coexisting together and creating a kind of weird spin. And that somehow is consistently what I'm doing all the time. And it ends up making this kind of weird trance like strange goddess person. And it in which Christina, you were that person. Right? It's always that. So I want to show the last thing, which is Court Henschlager did the amazing sound for the dolls, and he's my real partner in crime. We're married to each other, and we've been together for about 20 years. And so he did that. Thank you. He's an amazing audiovisual artist, and he agreed to do sound and not be and just do the audio rather than both. And so with the dolls was actually based on this movie, which was called Empire. And Empire was based on those four paintings, The Death of Empire, right, the Thomas Cole ones. And I thought I was redoing them. So that's funerary architecture by the Enlightenment architect, paper architect who never did anything, Etienne Boulet. So it was 18th century. This is how I keep returning to the scene of the crime, like the Michael Snow. It's like a room where a murder occurred, and I don't know why, but I keep going back there. And this is about the slow zoom in, like the Michael Snow slow zoom in. But it's at the edge of perception. So what's happening is in this funerary environment, this is half of it. These women decay, sunrise to sunset, and these women rot and die. And then vines grow all over them. I'm not making you see the whole thing because it's immensely slow and boring if you're sitting in a theater. All these things are meant to be installation based. So this to me was sort of like looking in a mirror and watching yourself grow old, which is what I do. And so, and the sound was by Ella Joyce Buckley, I commissioned from her. And I wanted this to be sort of the sound of sirens. We actually took music. At that point was the beginning of the Iraq War, and we took movies that were being made on YouTube by young Iranian women who were breaking the code and singing folk songs. And it was a certain style. And this sort of tragedy and elegy and the exposure of these women to transgressive self-exposure was very amazing to me, and it's a very sad music. So she was inspired by that music and made this sunrise to sunset music, which Court then took, resampled, remixed, ripped up, and did other stuff to. And that the dolls is about death and decay of empires. That's why there are all those icons of kings and queens and dead empires and corporate icons, logos, and I mixed them all together. So that was like, this dolls is a remake of this piece. So we're going to just see a little bit of it because, like I said, it's slow. And then we could just open it up for discussion. This is about the middle, from the middle. this experience for me of teaching here was tremendously a part of what my art ended up being, because this kind of research, setting parameters, working in a medium that had not really been explored as an artistic medium, and how the idea of the way we worked on the dolls as a kind of research project with students, so the classes, the original 8 or however many there were classes of experimental 3D, were more about propositions. What might art be within the simulated realm? And I didn't do it, but I would ask the student. It's not what I did, but it was. I would say, well, what might art be? In a simulated, how could, if we're simulating artistic practices, what does that mean? Simulating performance art, simulating painting, the simulated sculpture, virtual installations, it's simulated installation. Like, what could that mean, and what does that mean, and what is artificially constructing the real and time, and using this epistemological software that models all knowledge and shows relationships between sciences and how we construct both perception and what reality is, changed, was tremendously exciting. And also, I would say, but I want to try that too. So each of these classes was a kind of research into this evolving medium, and was a collective, dialectical, I think, for me, cooperative, collaborative thing, right? In fact, Liviu was a former student of mine. Yeah, and there he is, right? Now he's all grown up. So this idea that we're going, that we discuss these things as propositions, and as a kind of form of research. What if I do this to the camera? What if each of these pieces is a kind of research. I don't know what it's going to look like or what it's going to happen, and it's considering different questions that I also ask my students and that we talk about in the class, and becomes, it's my modus operandi, this kind of dialectical exchange. So that's it, and I'd like to therefore hear from you. So can we turn on lights more, because I don't like not seeing people. And I'd also like to say that all of them, Christina, Isabel, the choreographer, and Liviu, like, if you want to know how we did that with the live tracking and all of that in court, that the questions should be, they're part of it. So So does anyone have a question? Something you'd like to ask? I think that, Amy, you should start. Oh, wait a minute. Paul should start, because Paul's always good at the first question.
Why so resolutely black and white?
Oh, you mean what I showed you? They're not all black and white.
What are the temptations?
I think part of it is that I'm positioning what I do as post-photography, or that simulation as post-capture, and maybe the idea of it as sculpture somehow, and I'm not sure why. My new stuff is all very brightly colored, so that was the early stuff. Maybe it was just anti-gaming or something. I think it's about a kind of anti-gaming, anti-Pixar aesthetic. Something like that. But now I'm all color all the time. So I got sick of it. But I think it was about imagining it as a form of painting and drawing and modeling of mind. Engravings, etchings, that long tradition of mind model art. Is that a good answer? Yep. Anyone else?
Thank you. I was just curious. I guess in the videos that you showed, they all seem to lend themselves to being looped.
Yeah, they're all looped.
Okay, yeah. And so with a live performance, obviously you can't do that. So how did you adjust to a live medium where you couldn't have a monitor just playing the same thing over and over again.
Well, strangely enough, like the actual installation is part of a loop. I mean, it's not an installation, it's a performance. But it was situated inside another projection. So there was a kind of dollhouse world that goes from Sunside, the collapsed empires. So I had all these collapsed empires architectures, and I made a kind of landscape, and it goes from sunrise to sunset. And the dolls was an incident within that. And then you mean how to construct a dramaturgy? How did that happen? It's not my it's not easy. It wasn't easy for me. It took a while to figure out how to do that. This isn't the first one I did. I started. I went from an installation mindset. The loops were because I'm an installation artist. I'm thinking about painting and sculpture. That's why it was so amazing for me to be in a movie theater. Like I don't. That's like not my way of thinking. I think environmentally, and I think I'm making simulated paintings and sculptures that have time in them somehow. So I think I still have a lot of problem thinking narratively, but I just try to work with the music. So the collaborations with the composers who are very sophisticated, and then I let them bring me there and me somehow. Yeah.
This was really successful.
The dolls?
Yeah, completely, much more so than even at the actual walk. So do you think this is a new form?
Yeah, for sure.
This was very successful.
Yeah.
Do you
Thank
think
you.
this is a new form? Thank you.
Yeah, that's why I was thanking Amy so much. Where's Amy? Thank you, Amy. Because this is a new form for me. I want to keep doing this. Thank you, Amy. Like this was a chance, and I never thought about expanded cinema or cinema. For me, I'm still a painter. I'm like I'm in the 18th century. Brandon, back there. Thank you, because it looks great. It's amazing. Yeah, I want to keep doing this in this place. But no, I actually want a bigger one, an even bigger one. Yeah, right. This was great. That's all we've been doing is since the three of us been here, like, oh, the next one will be like this, and it's got to be this long. Yeah. Yes, and what's interesting is they go off and do whatever they do. It's not like me. At first, it was very hard because I thought, oh, I'm teaching them all my secret weird techniques. And then they just do whatever they do anyway. Yeah, right. I mean, they do other things with them. And they make their own secret weird techniques, which I then say, well, I'm going to take them back because it's not really fair otherwise. And then they let me. Well, in a way, it's not really stealing because they stole from me too. It's like a dialogue. I like to think of it as a conversation. And I also think that I think for me it was like showing the early stuff. Like it's very hard for me to talk about that stuff because I live my life in art. I've been in dialogue with artists my entire life. I feel like I'm in conversation with those dead guys, and I'm in conversation with Jeff Wall. And I'm in Michael Snow. I'm always talking to Michael Snow. And and so that's the way art. That's art history. That's how art gets made. It's a discussion into the future and the past. So, yeah.
Claudia, can we hear more about the collaboration, like the discussion between the four of you?
Well, can you want to talk about it? No? Yeah.
No.
Come on. Because it was like very improvisatory. We did everything on the fly. That was what was sort of interesting about it.
Yeah, I have a kind of a practice where I collaborate with theater organizations and groups, and I feel like it was that process that I was able to bring in or be familiar with, and it felt natural to kind of hear, let everyone express their ideas and thoughts, and for me to bring to the table my understanding of the technology and how to accomplish what we set out to do. And not that I know everything about it, but just to be able to try things and improvise and troubleshoot or problem solve. And that's what I was able to bring to the table, and I was really happy that Claudia was so open and understanding of that process, and that she does that with the students.
Well, it's very hard for me to talk about what I do because I'm not very rational about it, right? So I have a lot of skills like you do, and then I know a lot because I spent my life in art, but then I try not to think about that when I make work. I mean, I just want to trust to let it pop out, and it's very hard to do that with these kind of tools because the tools are so rationalistic and so systemish that to it's like a part of the dialectic of the romantic and the classic and these opposites that my work is dealing with all the time is how can you be a regular artist, like I always tell people, but I think I'm just a regular artist, except I happen to be using this augmented reality and this and that and the other thing. So I want to just let it flow through me. And that's very hard with these kind of tools. They're so rationalistic and systematic. And that was what was great about working with you too, because you were able to be very chaotic and sloppy and improvisatory with it and not worry about it too much. And I think with Christina, that was also what happened, right?
Um, I would say for me with this process, when I came in, because I kind of came in later in the process, I think, right?
Not that late,
Oh, okay, cool.
like 2 weeks later.
Oh, okay. But you had all the images. You had all like the base images, and it was more conversations with you about your ideas of the female, and we talked a lot. We watched a lot of voguing videos. But then when I saw how fast the images were changing on here, I didn't physically want to move as fast as the images that were behind, because I thought we'd lose everything. So I started looking at it more, and then once I heard the music too, that really affected me. To look at it like this robot, this robot that's kind of like Wally World or Shrek. You know, like when you go they go into to Shrek's land, and there's the robot and it comes up and it's like doing this little dance, and then it closes, and then hello, welcome to Wally World or whatever. That's how I looked at this, like these ideas of women, like these robots that would keep waking up and want to show you beauty or show you what you think women should be with these images. So. But it was fun to work with both of them. One, because I was in it, so then I couldn't actually see what was happening. So this week was really cool to be able to see how big it was, and I actually made changes today just because I found I could see what was actually happening. Because in the walk, we actually didn't have the images at every show until the last show, and again, I was in it, so it was fun to see it here.
Anyone else? Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. That your performance, by the way, was amazing. Everyone, thank you. And it was really, I guess, seeing that versus the work you showed during your talk, very very kind of like a new direction that I think is quite different, like color and things like that. But watching your older work, it just made me think of this idea about remediation. I don't know, is that something that you're thinking about a lot, or like, are you aware of like that kind of like those theories, or at the very least
You
thinking
mean
of
a media archaeological idea?
just like the idea of like how you're kind of like going back and like you're very obsessed or interested or whatever ingrained in like art history and kind of going
Yeah.
back to these
Yeah. So
forms, and you're
yeah.
like you just kept referencing forms, painting, sculpture. I'm making new paintings and new sculptures and
Yeah.
like trying to address that. So I guess it seems like you're very interested in that, and I guess I am interested in that kind of idea, but just curious if you're like thinking about like
Well,
these theories or anything.
this idea that history, like art, is about history passing through you, right? And then media art, we have a shorter history, but it's also, and that's why I showed the snow. And maybe that's why it's always black and white, because I'm also thinking of black and white photography. You know, I'm thinking of history passing through me. And I think of myself as an artist as that which history passes through, you know? And art history passes through us. And then we push it into the future. And yes, I think that's there. And I think, you know, I like art. I'm not an anti-artist. Like, I love art. So that, I think it's totally in there. And so the project I'm doing right now in my virtual installation class is actually an augmented reality app for the Art Institute of Chicago. It's a collaboration with Gloria Groom, who's the curator of the chief curator of all of thing other than the modern wing, right? And what European painting and history, yeah. So we're making overlays, like movies of any sort, that get overlaid onto these paintings from the impact of photography period, which is the early 19th century up to the Impressionism, through Impressionism. So this idea of being in dialogue with, and we read media archaeology. I don't know how much we read. I'm not, you know, with me it's more about making all the time, and this stuff is so demanding, like trying to teach people who don't know how to do this is not, it's hard. So we don't read that much. We make a lot of stuff. But in the beginning we were looking at media archaeology, you know, archaeological texts, and being in dialogue, and then putting it in relation to this hyper, you know, this is the edge of the envelope, what I do all the time. But that idea that it's a model of mind, and we keep expanding on what mind can construct, how we construct the real, and how that passes through history, that fascinates me. You know, when the Dürer, like, he thought the real was framed in terms of perspective and this kind of one point perspective, and that we keep like expanding the parameters in complexity of it, and that's like fascinating to me. But so yes, yeah, in short, yes. Yeah. Any others? And thank you, Gene Siskel. And thank you, Gene Siskel.